They call this a map, a charming relic from an age of discovery. This is a foundational lie. What you are looking at is not a chart of exploration. It is an inventory, an asset registry of a functioning global empire, copied from a technical document left behind. How could a cartographer in the 1300s, who never left his island, detail the power centers of a Tartarian civilization with a clarity that defies all logistical possibility? Have you ever felt that low hum of dissonance in the official history, that sense that the story doesn't add up? Let us know where and from what time you are watching this transmission. They tell you this is a work of art, a product of its time. I ask you now to set aside what you have been told. Become a forensic examiner with me. Let us approach the scene of the crime. In one hand, hold the official narrative of the 14th century. Feel its weight. A world of mud-caked streets, of wooden carts groaning under the strain of their own weight. A world where the stench of plague and superstition hangs heavy in the air, where the tallest structures are stone cathedrals built over a century with pulleys and brute force. This is the world they give us. Melbourne, Australia. The Royal Exhibition Building, a palace of industry from 1880, stands as a perfect echo of the structures depicted on our map. Buenos Aires, the same. San Francisco, before the Great Fire that conveniently erased its past, the same. Paris, the same. A single, coherent architectural language spoken across continents, across oceans, separated by decades and disparate cultures that supposedly had no deep connection. The official narrative calls this neoclassicism or beaux-arts, a stylistic choice, a fashion. This is a lie. This is the narrative of coverage. It is an insult to our intelligence. You do not build entire cities, from Chicago to Melbourne, with granite and marble columns weighing hundreds of tons as a matter of asterisk fashion. You do it because it is the standard. It is the template. The Manuscript of 1357 is not a map of exploration. It is a schematic of a functioning, unified, global civilization. The civilization the history books call Tartaria, and its signature, this unique architectural style, was not for beauty alone. It was for function. The domes were not just roofs, they were resonant chambers. The spires and obelisks were not just markers, they were atmospheric energy conductors. The vast, columned halls were not just for gatherings, they were power stations. We are looking at the remnants of a worldwide energy grid, based on principles of harmony and resonance that we have been engineered to forget. The world of the peasant. Now, with your other hand, I want you to touch the evidence itself. Let your eyes zoom in past the faded parchment, past the official museum label, and into the ink itself. What do you see? You do not see the world of the peasant. You see the world of gods. Look at the Great Khan, not depicted as a savage barbarian in a yurt, but as a global executive, enthroned in a gilded pavilion of crystalline geometry, holding an orb and scepter that signify total dominion. Observe the cities under his rule. These are not the crude wooden forts of medieval Europe. They are sprawling, meticulously planned metropolises, crowned with the familiar onion domes and obelisks of Antiquitech, the signature of a global, energy-literate civilization. You see organized caravans, not of a few haggard merchants, but vast logistical trains moving with the precision of a modern army, implying a level of security and infrastructure that laughs in the face of the official timeline. This is the first layer of evidence, the profound, undeniable cognitive dissonance. The chasm between the alleged creator and the creation is too vast to be an anomaly. It is a confession. How can a world of mud produce a blueprint for a world of gold? Tartaria was not just a vast empire of land. It was the planetary administration of this energetic and technological system. The manuscript is an asset inventory of that system, a snapshot taken just moments before it was deliberately dismantled. This is the synchronicity that the control matrix cannot allow us to see. It has built walls in our minds, convincing us that each nation, each culture, rose independently from the mud. It tells us a story of slow, painful progress, of isolated geniuses and warring tribes. But the physical evidence, the silent stone of our own cities, screams a different truth. A truth of a single, connected humanity, living within a network of astonishing technological sophistication. The manuscript's dating, around the time of the Black Death, is the crucial clue. The The plague was the perfect cover story for a global catastrophe. Not a biological event, but a technological or geological one, the Great Reset. An event, perhaps a mud flood, that buried the lower levels of these magnificent cities, severed the connections of the energy grid, and fractured the unified empire into 1,000 bewildered, amnesiac pieces. In the aftermath, the inheritors, the new elite, began the Great Suppression. The survivors, our ancestors, were left wandering in the ruins of a world they no longer understood. It cannot. The dissonance you feel is the alarm bell of a lie, a signal that the two realities you are being shown cannot coexist. But the crime is more subtle than a simple contradiction. The alteration here is not physical, it is semantic. The truth has been buried, not under dirt, but under dismissive language. They call it decorative art, to neutralize its power as data. They call it imagination to neuter its testimony. Look at the symbols they taught you to ignore. Count the flags. Dozens of them, across thousands of miles, all bearing the same insignia, the griffin, the owl of Tartaria. This is not the mark of a vague geographical region. This is the unified banner of a functioning, sovereign empire. Now look at the buildings they label as palaces or pavilions. Look at their design, their symmetry, their placement along what are clearly grid lines. Do these truly look like simple homes for kings? Or do they resemble power plants, atmospheric energy harvesters, communication towers designed not to scrape the sky in prayer, but in transmission? Pause here. Look at this specific structure. Look at the way the lines converge upon it. If your intuition is firing, if you see the impossibility and feel the resonance of this lie, then confirm it. This explains the haunting photographs of the 19th century. Empty, impossibly grand cities with a few dirt-streaked pioneers in horse-drawn carts posing nervously in the foreground. They did not build those cities, they found them. They were orphans moving into a mansion whose creators had vanished, and what couldn't be repurposed had to be destroyed. The great fires that swept through America's most Tartarian-looking cities in the late 19th century were not accidents, they were a coordinated demolition. The World's Fairs were the final, cynical act. Display the last remnants of the old world's glory, call them temporary structures made of plaster and wood, and then tear them down in front of cheering crowds, applauding the destruction of their own inheritance. This resonance is not confined to old photographs or distant lands. It is all around you. The pattern is hidden in plain sight. I ask you to stop and to look. Look at the oldest, most over-engineered buildings in your own city. The old central bank, the courthouse, the main post office, the state capitol building, the ones that seem too grand, too ornate, too solid for their supposed purpose in time. Do they not feel out of place? Like monoliths from another age, built by giants, now used by us for mundane paperwork. Acknowledge what you are seeing. Mark this transmission with your signal, so this evidence is shown to others who are beginning to awaken. The academic narrative is the cheap plaster slathered over the original, technical fresco. It was applied hastily, messily, to hide the complexity of the world that was. They did not erase the evidence, they simply relabeled it, counting on us never to look close enough, never to question the texture of the lie. They were wrong. And so we arrive at the heart of the illusion, the official story, the one they print in textbooks and recite in hushed, reverent tones in the halls of academia. It's a simple story, comforting in its neatness, and like all simple stories designed to conceal a complex truth, it shatters under the slightest pressure. They tell us that this document, this impossibly detailed atlas, was the work of one man, a cartographer named Abraham Cresques, working from his studio in Majorca in the mid-14th century. We are told to admire his genius, his singular ability to synthesize the scattered, unreliable tales of merchants and adventurers, most notably the accounts of Marco Polo. We are meant to envision him as a master weaver, taking threads of hearsay from a dozen different languages and creating a perfect tapestry of the known world. This is not a coincidence. It is a remnant, a scar. The architecture of the old world is the ghost in our machine. They are everywhere. The signature is still visible, bleeding through the cracks of the new, fabricated reality. Tell us where you have seen them. Document the anomaly in your own local matrix. The pattern itself is the proof, and together we can trace its edges. This manuscript does not just show us a map of a lost world. It gives us a map back to our own stolen history. And so, the great machine fell silent. The resonance that once connected continents faded into a low, planetary hum, and then, nothing. The survivors, our ancestors, emerged from the dust and the mud not into a world of ruin, but into a world of profound and terrifying silence. They were not primitives discovering a wilderness. They were orphans waking up in a fully furnished, automated mansion whose owners had vanished, and whose instruction manual was written in a language they could no longer comprehend. We became tenants in a palace we did not build, surrounded by an inheritance of technology so far beyond our fractured understanding that it could only be interpreted as magic, or as the work of gods. This is the genesis of the Great Forgetting. It is a romantic image. It is also a logistical absurdity. A fairy tale. Let us apply the cold, unforgiving scalpel of logic to this narrative. We are being asked to believe that one man, isolated on an island during the apocalyptic upheaval of the Black Death, accomplished a task that would challenge a modern intelligence agency with all its resources. He would have needed to acquire dozens, if not hundreds, of disparate accounts. He would have needed to be a polyglot of unparalleled skill to translate them from Italian, Persian, Arabic, and Mongol dialects. He would then have to cross-reference these tales, which were notoriously embellished and contradictory, to filter out fantasy from fact. He would have to perform complex geodesic calculations to reconcile conflicting distances and place names, all without a unified system of measurement, without satellite imagery, without even a reliable library. He would have to do all of this while the world outside his window was literally dying, while trade routes collapsed and information flows ceased. This is not history, it is hagiography. It is the deification of a man to explain away an artifact that should not exist. The official explanation is not an explanation at all. It is a cover narrative, a placeholder for a truth they dare not confront. The birth of the cargo cult. When these small, scattered pockets of humanity stumbled upon the artifacts of the world before, a document like the 1357 manuscript, for instance, they were not seeing a technical schematic. They were not seeing a global asset inventory of a functioning Tartarian infrastructure. They were seeing a beautiful, intricate object. They could appreciate its form, but its function was a complete and utter mystery. And so, the most dangerous transition in human history occurred. The demotion of function to form. The degradation of science into art. Imagine a survivor holding this manuscript. He cannot comprehend the data points, the logistical routes, the calculated placement of energy hubs. But he sees the gold leaf. He sees the majestic figure of the Khan. He sees the elegant script. He sees an object of immense power and status. And so, the global power grid registry is taken from the engineer's archive and hung on the wall of a new, petty king's drafty stone castle. It becomes a bauble, a decoration, a symbol of a power he pretends to have but could never hope to wield. The map was no longer a tool for navigating the world. It became a ritual object for claiming it. The knowledge was lost, but the mimicry of knowledge had begun. The sheer improbability of this one-man miracle should be the first signal of a profound cognitive dissonance. We are shown a world of mud and plague, yet we are handed a product of pristine, globalized information. The two cannot coexist in the same timeline. The narrative simply does not compute. So what is the alternative? The truth is always simpler, and far more unsettling. Abraham Kress was not a genius creator. He was not an inventor. He was, at best, a highly skilled copyist, a restorer. He was the man tasked with transcribing a document far older, far more significant than he could possibly have understood. He was given access to a piece of inherited technology, a relic from a fallen world, a technical manual from the global administration of the Tartarian Empire. His job was not to create, but to translate, to take the data from this pre-existing high-technology document and render it into the visual language of his time, with its charming illustrations of kings and caravans. He was the medieval equivalent of a technician saving a file in a different format. This is why the map contains data points that no European of the era could have known. It's why the coastlines are so unnervingly accurate. It's why the network of cities and trade routes across Asia is laid out with such systematic precision. This is the anthropological tragedy that underpins our modern world. We are a civilization built on the ritualized misinterpretation of inherited technology. Look at the maps that came Tanefta Atlas. They are a catastrophic regression. Where the 1357 manuscript shows precise data, the maps of the 15th and 16th centuries show sea monsters and vast empty spaces labeled, "Here be dragons." This is not a natural evolution of cartography. It is the signature of a cargo cult. It is the work of a culture desperately trying to replicate the appearance of their predecessors, science without understanding any of the underlying principles. The act of drawing the map became a sacred ritual, a hollow echo of a lost scientific process. The goal was no longer accuracy. The goal was to create an object that looked like the powerful maps of the old world. This pattern repeats everywhere, a planetary cognitive dissonance. The survivors saw the towering spires and obelisks of the old world, the atmospheric energy conductors of the Tartarian grid. Unable to grasp their function, they repurposed them. A gilded antenna piercing the clouds was no longer a component in a wireless energy network. It became a steeple, a minaret, a holy symbol to which one prayed. A massive, domed power plant, with its intricate acoustics and resonant chambers, was no longer a utility. Kreskvas didn't gather this intelligence. He inherited it. He was the custodian of a ghost's memory. The founder myth of Abraham Kresk is a necessary fiction. When an anomalous artifact appears in the historical record, an object whose existence breaks the established timeline, the system must generate a story to contain it. The story of a lone, inexplicable genius is the preferred method. It quarantines the anomaly, turning a piece of disruptive evidence into a quaint historical anecdote. It allows them to hang the map on a museum wall and label it a masterpiece of medieval art, when it should be labeled Exhibit A in the trial of our falsified history. They created a scapegoat for genius to avoid admitting the existence of a forgotten science. Think about this. Does the story of the lone cartographer working by candlelight while the Black Death raged, creating a perfect world map from sailors' yarns, truly satisfy your intellect? Or do you, like us, feel the deep, resonant hum of a story that is incomplete? Do you sense the presence of a vast, missing piece, a gaping hole in the script they have handed us? This fragility, this paper-thin explanation, is not a flaw in their research. It is a feature of the system. The narrative is kept deliberately weak, almost childish, because its purpose is not to convince the critical mind, but to placate the unquestioning one. It became a cathedral, a parliament, a temple. We filled these grand, humming structures with our new dogmas and our new politics, like children playing house in the cockpit of a crashed starship, pulling levers and pressing buttons with no idea of their original purpose. We took the hardware of a Type 1 civilization and overlaid it with the primitive software of superstition and fear. The very symbols of our power are the vestiges of this mimicry. The crowns of kings, with their intricate metalwork and gemstones, are they merely jewelry? Or are they the ritualized, non-functional copies of technical headgear that once interfaced with the grid? The scepters and orbs held by monarchs, are they simple baubles? Or are they the inert, powerless descendants of control rods and resonant spheres used to modulate energy flows? We perform the ceremonies, we wear the costumes, we repeat the ancient words, but the meaning is gone. We are actors in a play we did not write, reciting lines from a script whose true context has been engineered out of our memory. We live inside the echo. We worship the shadow of a technology we were never meant to forget. If this vision of an amnesiac humanity resonates with you, if you have ever felt that you are walking through the ruins of a forgotten future, then ensure you are subscribed. It is a lullaby for our curiosity. But we are no longer sleeping. We see the impossibilities pile up, one on top of the other, until the official story collapses under its own weight. Abraham Kreskvas was not the author of this map. He was merely the first one to leave his fingerprints on the crime scene. The real authors belong to a world we were never meant to remember. We've been told a story of a lone genius, a craftsman in a dimly lit workshop, piecing together the world from the fragmented tales of sailors and merchants. It is a romantic, comforting narrative. But now, we must leave the romance behind and enter the cold, unforgiving world of a forensic audit. We will not be examining art. We will be auditing an impossibility. We will be weighing the official narrative against the immutable laws of physics, economics, and logistics, and we will watch it crumble under that weight. Let us begin with the raw data. The sheer information density of this manuscript is the first anomaly, an artifact out of time. The official story suggests Abraham Cresques compiled this from travelers' reports. Let us, for a moment, entertain this fantasy. Let's calculate the cost. We are not talking about a few port cities. We need awakened minds for the work ahead. Because this loss was not a simple accident of history, this was not a gradual decay. The regression was too fast, too absolute, too global. A science that could map the planet with such precision does not simply evaporate. A technology that could build on a planetary scale does not simply crumble into dust. It was silenced. The manual wasn't just lost. It was taken from us. The lights weren't just turned off. They were deliberately shattered. And the silence that followed was not an absence of sound. It was the carefully engineered sound of a new narrative being written over the ashes of the old one, a cover story for the greatest crime in human history. This grand amnesia was not an accident. The cargo cult was not a natural evolution. It was the result of a verdict and the execution of a sentence passed down upon an entire world. We have been shown the evidence of a global, unified civilization. We have seen the impossibly advanced document it left behind. Now, we must examine the crime scene of its disappearance. We must dissect the very mechanism of the silence that followed. The 1357 manuscript is a photograph taken 1 second before the impact. We are talking about over 50 correctly named cities inside China alone, many of them deep inland. We are talking about the accurate charting of Siberian river systems, the positioning of the Tian Shan and Altai mountain ranges, the naming of oases along the Silk Road that were little more than fortified hamlets in the middle of nowhere. Each one of these is a single data point, and in the pre-industrial world, a single verified data point was one of the most expensive commodities on Earth. To acquire just one of these points, say, the precise location of the city of Khanbalik and its relation to the coastline, would require a dedicated expedition. A team of at least a dozen men, surveyors, translators, armed guards, scribes. This team would need to travel for months, if not years, across thousands of kilometers of hostile territory. They would require hundreds of pack animals. These animals and men need to be fed. We are talking about literal tons of grain, salted meat, and water. The logistics of the supply chain to keep this single team operational for 1 year would bankrupt a minor European nobleman. Now, multiply that. Multiply that effort by the hundreds, if not thousands, of distinct, accurate data points present on this single document. Its dating, nestled right against the historical event known as the Black Death, is not a coincidence. It is the alibi. The plague was the perfect cover narrative for a crime of planetary scale. For this was not a plague of the body, but an execution of a civilization. A meticulously planned, technologically sophisticated demolition. The historical accounts of the time, when filtered through a modern lens, speak not of disease, but of something else. They speak of a corrupted atmosphere, of miasmas rising from the earth, of the sky itself turning against humanity. This was a reset, a hard reset, an event of either atmospheric plasma discharge or acoustic soil liquefaction. A weapon deployed to sever the arteries of the Tartarian Empire, to pull the plug on the global energy grid that powered their world. The result was the event we now call the Mud Flood. Not a gentle rising of the waters, but a cataclysm that turned the ground itself to liquid, swallowing the foundations of their world whole. It buried the first floors of their magnificent structures, it severed their communication lines, and it shattered the unified empire into 1,000 isolated, terrified pockets of survivors. And into this chaos, into this power vacuum, stepped the usurpers, the architects of the new, diminished reality. The calculation becomes staggering. We are looking at an intelligence-gathering operation on a scale that no European power of the 14th century could even conceive, let alone fund or execute. The cost of acquiring the raw information contained in the Atlas Catalao would not just exceed the GDP of a kingdom like Aragon or Portugal, it would likely exceed the combined GDP of all of Christian Europe at the time. We are being asked to believe that this monumental, continent-spanning project, a project that would strain the resources of a modern nation-state, was undertaken for the sole purpose of producing a decorative map for a teenage prince. This is not history, this is a logistical fairy tale. It is an insult to our intelligence. The mathematics are brutal. They do not care for academic prestige or historical consensus. They present a clear verdict. The information in this document was not, and could not have been, gathered by its alleged 14th century authors. It could only have been inherited. But the logistical paradox deepens when we move from information acquisition to information processing. Let us assume, against all logic, that this mountain of raw data, scrolls from Marco Polo, parchments from Franciscan friars, verbal accounts from Genoese traders, all in different languages, using different units of measurement, riddled with errors, exaggerations, and outright lies, somehow found its way to a single workshop in Majorca. The parasite class that rose from the ashes initiated the second, and perhaps more brutal, phase of the attack, the Great Suppression, the engineering of forgetting. This was a war waged not with energy weapons, but with ink and fire. It was a systematic, multi-generational campaign to erase every last trace of the previous world from the memory of mankind. First came the burning of the archives. History was not just rewritten, it was incinerated. Libraries were purged. Maps that showed the true scope of the old world were declared heretical and destroyed. Artifacts like our manuscript were confiscated, hidden away in private vaults, or deliberately misinterpreted by a new class of court historians, intellectual mercenaries paid to construct a new, fabricated timeline. The term Tartary, once the name of a global power, was semantically degraded, twisted into a vague label for a distant, savage land of barbarians. A character assassination performed on an entire empire. Then came the hunting of the knowledgeable. The Inquisition was not a war on religious heresy. It was an intellectual cleanup crew. Its true targets were the surviving engineers, the scientists, the architects, the keepers of the old world knowledge. Anyone who remembered how the technology worked, anyone who could reboot the system, they were branded as sorcerers, as heretics, and they were silenced permanently. What happens next? The official story presents us with a supercomputer in human form. Abraham Crescas would have needed to become a central intelligence agency unto himself. He would have had to cross-reference conflicting accounts, translate between a dozen languages and dialects, convert various systems of distance into a single, coherent scale, and then project this three-dimensional, contradictory information onto a two-dimensional plane with breathtaking accuracy. He would have had to do this without databases, without calculation engines, without satellite verification. He would have had to do this in the middle of the Black Death, a pandemic that shattered supply chains, halted travel, and killed a third of the population. The narrative demands we believe in a miracle of data synthesis, a cognitive event so far beyond the documented capabilities of the era that it borders on the supernatural. And this brings us to the most damning evidence of all, the evidence of absence. The great silence in the historical record. Where is the infrastructure that supported this project? A masterpiece of this magnitude does not emerge from a vacuum. It is the capstone of a vast pyramid of knowledge and industrial practice. Where are the drafts, the preliminary sketches, the failed versions, the corrected scrolls? Any creative process, especially one of this complexity, leaves behind a trail of trial and error. The memory of giants was ground into dust and scattered to the winds. This is the mechanism of silence, a two-stage protocol. First, a physical cataclysm to break the infrastructure. Second, an information war to break the spirit and erase the memory. They left us wandering in the ruins of our own inheritance, and then they handed us a history book that told us we built these crude shacks ourselves. They created a species with cosmic amnesia. But the silence is not perfect. It has cracks. Documents like the 1357 manuscript are the echoes that refuse to fade. Silence is their most powerful weapon. Sharing this information is our only defense. Send this to someone who needs to hear the echo. This manuscript, this impossible artifact, does more than rewrite a chapter of history. It redefines the very protagonist of the story, us. The final and most profound casualty of the Great Reset was not the loss of our cities, not the burying of our inherited technology, but the engineered demolition of our identity. We are a civilization with amnesia, wandering the halls of a magnificent global estate that we were told we built, brick by painful, primitive brick. The official history is a cover narrative, a lullaby sung to keep us asleep, a comforting story of a linear, upward progression from mud huts to skyscrapers. Yet, for the Atlas Catalao, there is nothing. It appears almost fully formed, a technological triumph without a technological history. Where are the schools of cartography that could have trained a mind like Kresge's to this level of geospatial synthesis? They do not exist. Where are the specialized instrument makers who would have crafted the tools necessary for such precision? We find no record of them. Where are the preceding maps, the simpler works, that show a clear progression of knowledge leading up to this magnum opus? They are not there. The maps that come before it are laughably primitive in comparison, and the maps that come after it, for a century or more, are a marked regression. The official history presents us with a cathedral of information and tells us it was built by a single man in a single lifetime, using the tools of a village carpenter with no blueprints, no quarry, and no workforce. This is the core of the audit. The official narrative is not just improbable, it is a violation of the fundamental principles of production. It posits a conclusion without a premise, a product without a supply chain, a result without a process. The intellectual and industrial backstage required for the creation of this map is completely, utterly missing. But the evidence, the cold, logistical impossibility of our own past, screams a different tale. It speaks not of invention, but of inheritance. It speaks of a species not ascending, but recovering from a catastrophic fall. We are not the builders. We are the orphans who found the keys to a mansion we no longer understand, whose systems we cannot repair, whose purpose we have long forgotten. This realization is the source of our deep, unspoken cognitive dissonance, the feeling that we are strangers in our own world, haunted by the ghosts of our own forgotten greatness. The 1357 manuscript is proof that we did not evolve slowly from the darkness. We were cast into it. The history they wrote for us is a cage, designed to limit our perception of what is possible. They taught us we are small, fearful, and divided, because a fragmented people, terrified of their own shadow, will never ask who built the castles they shelter in. They gave us a narrative of struggle and scarcity to mask the truth of our stolen abundance. To decipher the truth of this map is therefore not an academic exercise. It is an act of profound rebellion. It is the reclamation of memory, the first step toward reclaiming our dignity. Each symbol they ignored, each city they labeled mythical, is a thread. The only logical conclusion an auditor can reach is that the asset was not manufactured, it was acquired, it was found. We are looking not at a 14th century creation, but at a 14th century copy of a much older, more advanced document. A technical schematic from a precursor civilization, a global inventory sheet left behind by the true surveyors of this planet. Kresge was not the author. He was the librarian, the restorer, perhaps even the decryptor, tasked with transcribing an incomprehensible piece of inherited technology into a form his own time could vaguely understand. The numbers do not lie. The tonnage of supplies, the man-hours of labor, the sheer economic and intellectual force required to create this document from scratch in the 1300s is a fantasy. If you believe you can construct a logical sequence of events, a plausible supply chain that accounts for this data within the known constraints of the 14th century, I invite you to lay out your calculations. The silence that follows will be your answer. The logistical impossibility of the manuscript is not the end of the inquiry. It is the beginning. It is the threshold we must cross, leaving the comfortable nursery of official history behind. Once we accept that this artifact was not created in 1375, but inherited, a far more profound question emerges. What exactly did Abraham Kresge's copy? And if we pull on these threads, we do not just unravel a historical lie, we unravel the matrix of control that has bound human consciousness for centuries. This document is not a map of the ancient world. It is a map to our own hijacked potential. The autopsy of the lie is the first step toward the resurrection of the truth. But this is not a journey for the faint of heart. It requires a commitment to look into the abyss of our own forgotten past and not flinch. The investigation does not stop here. It deepens. If the resonance of this truth echoes within you, if you feel the call to continue unearthing what was deliberately buried, then our work has just begun. There are more manuscripts to decode, more lies to dismantle. Join us. The resistance to the great forgetting needs your eyes. Subscribe and activate the signal. Welcome to the search for our stolen history. What system does this document truly describe? The answer is etched into the very illustrations they tell us are mere decoration. Look closer. The architecture shown in the far reaches of the Tartarian Empire, The ornate domes, the towering spires, the triumphant arches, they possess a strange and unsettling familiarity. They resonate with something deep in our visual memory, and this is where the vertigo begins. Because these structures, supposedly imagined by a medieval cartographer to depict a distant and exotic land, are not fantasies. They are blueprints. We are told to see this as a map of Asia, but let us use it as a lens. Let us use it as a key to unlock a global pattern. The gilded pavilion of the Great Khan, with its impossible dome and soaring columns, suddenly we are no longer looking at a medieval manuscript. We are staring at a photograph of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the same architectural DNA. The same majestic, almost arrogant, display of engineering prowess. Now jump. From the heart of the supposed Mongol Empire on the map, we leap across the globe to St. Petersburg, Russia, and see the same neoclassical grandeur lining its canals, built long before the age of heavy machinery, we are told. We jump again, this time to the other side of the world.